This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 269 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, and like last Tuesday's episode, this is another GABF Gold special episode where I talk to recent gold medal winners at the Great American Beer Festival about the creative, technical decisions behind their winning beers. In this episode, the beers we talk about couldn't be any more different, from the hazy, juicy pale ale of Wye Hill and Raleigh to the American-style lager of Deadwords in Orlando. But I think you'll get something both from the thiol-focused process of Wye Hill, as well as how Deadwords won gold in a category historically dominated by macro-brewed light lagers. And they did it with a light lager hopped only with Vista hops. Yes, I did say that correctly. Vista hops, that same Vista that Joe Stang and I were rubbing in the field in Yakima a few weeks ago with Eric Clare and Alex of CLS while we were getting late melon and stone fruit notes. Of course, exactly the hop you might think that you'd win a light lager medal with. Anyway, both of those Q&As are worth a listen, so let's dig right in. But first, step into the modern era of brewing. AccuBrew presents a game-changing fermentation monitoring system, giving brewers unprecedented real-time insight into yeast health and activity. By simply mounting a sensor to a port, brewers get real-time information through the AccuBrew app, tracking sugar conversion, temperature, and clarity. And just one AccuBrew sensor protects every tank in the event of a glycol system failure. Get your hands on a tool that will help you deliver your best brew every batch. AccuBrew has your back because it was designed for you, the brewer, by brewers. Visit AccuBrew.io today for a no-obligation 90-day trial. Also, this episode is brought to you by CanCraft and BSG. Whether you need a full service packaging experience from design to delivery, or you just need some aluminum cans, CanCraft can do it. CanCraft's design and aluminum specialists are here to support your business every step of the way. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com/CanCraft to learn how CanCraft can help realize your brand potential. For this segment of this GABF Gold edition of the podcast, I'm joined by Greg Winget from Wye Hill Brewery in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Good to be here.
You won gold for a juicy hazy pale ale called Luminous Beings in a category sponsored by our good friends at G&D Chillers. Congratulations on that. You do it in an interesting way using thiol-focused yeast and fermentation.
Yep.
I'm excited to dig in on how you all have built a process around this. And it sounds to me, as we've been talking before we started here, that you are using thiol producing yeast and whatnot across other beers in the portfolio. Let's get started and talk about Luminous Beings from the kind of core as you started thinking about how to design it, and then what kind of iterations that has gone through. Where'd you start in the giant creative process around building a juicy and hazy pale ale? Obviously, there's some design challenges here because you're working within the constraints of a lower ABV beer, which, pushing this kind of hop expression and a smaller beer brings its own challenges. Finding a way to support those flavors and get them perfectly balanced in a smaller beer, always an interesting thing. From that creative process, talk to me about how you started building the idea for it.
So, honestly, the creative process for this beer was we want to use Cosmic Punch in an IPA, and we want to get 2 turns out of it. So we wanted to develop a beer that was lower ABV that we could then repitch into a higher ABV beer, which honestly, a lot of creative decisions in production breweries are centered around stuff like that, especially at a smaller scale. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Indiana, which is home of many incredible pale ales like Zombie Dust, Daisy Cutter, Lizard King, beers like that. So I've always been a huge fan of the style. Obviously, those are more, I guess you'd call them like West Coast or I guess Midwest focused pale ales. So they're clearer, but they still have a nice, juicy character to the hops. So basically, I was just trying to take a concept that I was really familiar with growing up on. Those are some of the first beers I ever really enjoyed, and just turn it into something a little bit more modernized. So when I was talking to the other brewers here about,
So it's interesting that you're in the juicy hazy pale ale category, but what you're talking about, are not necessarily the kind of heavier, thicker, sweeter, kind of hazy IPAs. They're definitely that Midwest kind of unfiltered,
Yep.
Type of juicy hazy pale ale.
Yeah, and that's honestly our approach to every hoppy beer that we make. We want them to be hop forward, juicy, drinkable, but with not low bitterness. This beer is about 35, 40 IBUs at 5%. I mean, I'd say it's on honestly the higher side for some of these beers. We always wanted to have that bitter back note. It's never going to finish sweet. And that's the case, honestly, with all our IPAs. We never use lactose, for example, as well. We do mash pretty high just to get some of that residual sugar. And then obviously the yeast that we're using is helping us out a little bit on that with attenuation. But yeah, the goal is always to make the most drinkable beer we possibly can. So, yeah. So here basically, the thiols they're definitely a strong element to it, but at a certain point, it's an accent in this beer because we aren't maximizing that thiol content in a way that we could. Because basically we're just building up that yeast to use again and then maximize the thiol content in the next beer. But that kind of lends itself to this lower ABV, more drinkable experience because it doesn't have to be over the top. Some of the other thiolized beers that we're making are very over the top with the thiols.
Sure.
Which is really cool. But when you're repitching yeast, you don't want to active dry hop. We're a little bit more careful about how we incorporate hops into that mash bill, and then into the whirlpool and everything as well. So
it's tempting for me to say, okay, this is going to be a hop focus, it's thiol, so it's hop focus, and we should start talking about that first. But it also, as we know, when we start talking about thiols, malt is actually a pretty significant contributor to that entire, thiol approach. How do you then, thinking about the concert that you're going to have here between hops and, malt and in this kind of thiolized pale ale, how do you start building a kind of grist and body support for it?
Sure. I would say one of the most valuable things that we have on the malt side is an incredible local malt purveyor, actually several. So we're a 100% craft malt house. Primarily we get our grain from Carolina Malt House in Cleveland, North Carolina. Fantastic malt. It's kind of like local breweries where you always want to support local, but not every local business is great. This is an example of one that is fantastic, and we developed a relationship with them early on, and it's just really kept going. Epiphany Malt in Durham, right around the corner from us too, has some great specialty stuff. And we recently started using Sugar Creek Malt in Indiana, back close to where I used to live. So really, that's a huge core part of the malt character in all of our beers. In a beer like this, we're really just using Pilsner malt and malted oats. Again, it just comes down to that drinkability. It definitely contributes a lot of character. I'm not sure 100% of the science behind how the oats and Pilsner are specifically contributing to thiolization. I'm sure there's something there.
Sure.
We've definitely noticed that in like heavier wheated beers, there seems to be more of an effect, or at least a different effect. But really the base is just this incredible Pilsner malt, these fantastic oats, malted oats, not flaked as well. So you got that nice, rich, like cereal character to it as just kind of a back note.
For this craft Pilsner malt, obviously you've brewed, I'm sure, with more, mainstream non-craft, but we shouldn't go craft.
Sure.
It's such a weird line to write.
Right.
Every malt, most of the maltsters that are selling malt, they're all good companies that all make great products, and this is a decision for you all to connect to local in a way that makes sense for what you do and the way that your brand is connecting. But from that perspective, working with, this craft malt from a local, North Carolina maltster, what would you say some of the differences are in the way of that expresses, or you work with it versus, say, either a Environment Pils or a more kind of mainstream, Pilsner malt?
So obviously, in a brewery, consistency is always a focus. That's why a lot of those like larger industrial scale malt providers are fantastic for that, because that you're getting the same product every single time. That's always a concern when you're working with a smaller grain provider. This malt house specifically, the main malt house we use, Carolina Malt House, they're on the nose pretty much all the time. They provide a lot of really good analyses of their products. And it's really just, it comes down to, there's almost like a terroir to it. Like people talk about terroir in wine, where we want the beer to taste like it came from here. And it's almost like an indescribable quality. I know part of it is just like freshness as well, because, the grain that they're malting is coming from within 50 miles of their facility. So it's all very close. They mill it for us too and do a fantastic job milling it. So everything comes in perfectly ready to go. And honestly, consistency across the board for the size of their operation has been great for us. So, but really it's the flavor. It's become like a house flavor for us, really. There's a uniqueness to it. I always love, Wireman Pils, of course. And some other, there are fantastic large scale malt providers out there, but there's just something about this that really clicked for me. And so we just never stopped. And honestly, the price has not been an issue for us either, which is the other big challenge with using craft malt. But it's very
You're not trying to hit a price point out there on a shelf.
Yeah. So, It really started out, we started out doing it that way because we couldn't really afford to buy pallets of grain and paying LTL freight fees and everything, and these guys would just drop off whatever we needed for $50 in a van. So it's like, okay, cool. And it's pre-milled. We don't have a mill. We don't even have mash rakes, so we don't have a lot of our system is I guess antiquated is the wrong, I like to call it vintage.
Okay. Yeah. It's a rustic system.
Yeah, so there was just a lot about the way that all of these pieces lined up working with them that kind of has made it a no-brainer to continue working with them. So
Sure. So oats and Pilsner malt, rough percentage of those?
15% malted oats. Everything else is Pils in this one. Yep.
Cool. So what's then a mash regimen look like for this? You mentioned that you're mashing a little bit higher in order to make sure you've got a little bit of body left to it.
Yeah, we'll mash at the higher end of medium body, like medium high, 155, 156. We mash hop as basically to get thiol precursors, but honestly, we mash up pretty much all of our beers now.
Yeah.
It just helps buffer pH. I think it adds character too. That's anecdotal, but I think that it does. It's a way to saturate the beer with hop flavor without adding IBUs, or without adding many. Maybe it's like an IBU or two, but it's not much.
Sure.
But yeah, we generally this beer will mash up with typically with Tahiki, New Zealand Cascade. This batch, actually, we couldn't get New Zealand Cascade, so we just used regular Cascade, and apparently it turned out good. So.
There you go. How much, so generally, how much hops do that tend to be, into the mash, to produce some sort of thiol precursor that's meaningful in some way or another?
In this beer, it's only about 2 pounds. Once again, this one's not as thiol focused. We're doing some of the new beers we're experimenting with. We just made a beer last week with a new thiolizing strain called Heliogazer from Omega that's supposed to be 20 times the amount of thiols as Cosmic Punch, and we did 9 pounds of hops in the mash, and it was one 11-pound bag split through a whole 7-barrel batch, and it just smells like Scuppernong jelly. Like, it's straight up white grape, and it was all solids too. Like, there's no. We're like, man, we could have dry hopped with Nelson or Galaxy or something and not gotten this much tropical and grape character out of the hops. So it's really interesting the way that works. And that was just honestly kind of, we were like, we've heard that this works, so let's try it out and see if it does. And it's really interesting to kind of toy with that as a tool and a flavor element. In Luminous Beings, it's the balance is important, so we're not going to use as much in the mash, but it's definitely still a key player in there.
Sure. Yeah, and so 5% ABV is your goal. What's a typical finishing gravity on this beer?
I think this batch probably came out about 10, 12, somewhere around there, like low 10s in specific gravity. We're getting probably somewhere between 75 to 80% attenuation on this beer specifically. Sometimes a little bit higher on our thiolized IPAs.
Yeah, so it's dry, but it's not painfully dry or anything like that. So we go through the mash process. What's the rest of the hot side look like for that? Through that kind of boil regimen, you've already got some hops in there through the mash. Do any first wort hopping, or do you push it all back into the whirlpool?
So we use CTZ a lot in thiolized beers, just because I know it has a lot of good oils for that. In this particular beer, and a lot of our more traditional IPA recipes, so some of the stuff that we've been doing, a year or so ago, generally we'll do a 60-minute addition that's fairly small. So it could be, in a beer like this, it's half a pound of CTZ, so high alpha hop. And then everything else is going in the whirlpool, hot side. So we'll drop the pH under 5, so usually about 4.8, and drop the temp down to 180, and do a 30-minute spin, 30-minute rest, and knock out like that.
Why, it's so funny because, of course, this last, GABF Gold episode, as I was talking with Precarious Beer Project, they're doing a similar cool pool, process on that. It can be, obviously, especially on a vintage system like yours, working through that can be kind of a pain. It's not the easiest process to drop temperature on a kettle like that quickly and put it back in. Why? What do you find is the benefit from that lower whirlpool temperature?
It's just more aromatic saturation of the hops. So it's really just trying to maximize the nose that we're getting from the whirlpool without increasing the bitterness. Because if you on this beer we're adding maybe a pound per barrel in the whirlpool. On some of our other beers it's 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. The bitterness gets out of control pretty quickly if you finish your boil at 213 degrees, and if you just do a hop stand right at flame out, maybe your temp drops to 205 by the end of your rest, but it's still going to be pretty high.
So, you're still in deep isomerization territory right there. And I mean, even 180 will still get you some isomerization.
And it's hard to calculate, right? Like if you plug it in a Beersmith you say it's flame out, it boils for 0 minutes and it tells you 0 IBUs, but you're getting a lot more than that. There are other calculators out there for that, but it's still kind of nebulous. So it's just
sure. How do you mentally figure that for yourself?
Honestly, it's trial and error. So we started off doing, just the way that we were doing it for years at other breweries, where we would just, drop them at flame out, spin it. Now we literally have a hose that we run from the knockout loop back into the kettle, run it through the hex, drop it down to 180 degrees, sometimes lower, depending on the beer, and then just send the hops. And it's just been iteratively over batches. We've kind of figured out, okay, I dropped it from 210 to 200, and then from 210 to 190, and then 190 to 180, and then that was kind of the sweet spot. So
you just keep liking it more, and then you dropped it lower, and like,
exactly,
maybe that was a little too much, and then we go back up. Sure. How would you? I mean, is there a quality to the bitterness outside of just the pure bitterness numbers? Is there some, kind of shape or texture to the bitterness, or flavor to it that you find at that lower temperature level just kind of supports or meshes with the beer in a more attractive way?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly soft beer. I would say, so when we're doing IPAs in this way, I would say the bitterness is a little bit more pronounced. But in a pale ale like this, we wanted to just have that little backbone of like kind of an herbaceous character, a little bit of pine maybe. This beer we're using Mosaic and Motueka. So nothing like too crazy on the cohumulone front, other than the half pound of CTZ at the front end. But yeah, I mean it's a fairly soft bitterness, but it's just enough to be at that threshold where when you finish the sip, there's a crispness to it that kind of accentuates that relatively dry finish as well.
Sure. Now, does that same Mosaic and Motueka carry through into the dry hop,
yep.
or do you? So why those two hops together?
So it's funny you should ask. Literally, our head brewer thought that it was funny that it was a kind of a Momo, like an alliteration. And I was like, sure, Mosaic and Motueka sounds great. Let's try that. And it was just like
highly scientific.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Well, hey, at least you're honest about that, right?
We use all tons and tons of different hop varieties, and we're constantly trying to find new ones. Those are two, obviously, that we were fairly confident in. Those are two hops that we use all the time. Mosaic, obviously, huge hop for everybody in the U.S. and
sure,
Motueka is one of our brewery's all-time favorite hops as well. So,
what makes it a favorite for you?
It's just the way that it expresses, especially in a beer like this, just that really nice tropicality without being too overboard. It's delicate, but still really characterful. I don't know. It's great in blends too. Like we've made single hop Motueka beers before, and they're fantastic. But it really complements other fruit forward hops too. And especially like I love blending New Zealand hops with American hops. Something like Mosaic, on its own has a tendency to come off, can be kind of diesely or kind of cat pee. But if you add something like Motueka to kind of balance the structure out, I think that really works well.
Sure. And then there's a little bit of, and I think a little bit of that old school, new school blend, a little, it feels, there's something that feels comfortable and familiar while also feeling new and fresh. Kind of keeps it
and
fun.
Then you add that little kiss of thiol on there, and it just kind of, the whole picture starts to come into focus a little better.
Yeah. How much goes into the whirlpool? How much of the overall kind of, hop picture?
We're doing like a pound per barrel in the whirlpool here, which is, I think we're doing probably 3 pounds per barrel total. So yeah, about a third.
Yeah. Cool. Anything, then I guess we'll move into, talking about fermentation from there. And this is where the real, cosmic, magic starts happening in this thiol world. What, walk me through then that process, as you come out of hot side and move into cold side.
Sure. We'll usually, with Cosmic Punch, we'll pitch at like 64 and just let it free rise around 68.
Why that cool?
It's just another, something that we found works to help develop that character. It just, I think really at the end of the day, Cosmic Punch is basically a mutated English ale yeast strain. And that's just, pitching cool on English ale strains always seems to help a little bit, at least in my experience. And then just letting it free rise.
Help in what way? In terms of not being too estery?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just to create a more balanced beer. And then the free rise, just to get it up into that diacetyl transformation territory to clean all that up. And then when we dry hop, we'll let it go up to 72 at the highest, and just again make sure that everything's clean by the end of it, and then we're ready to go.
What does that fermentation curve typically look like? And, are there any points along that process where you all pay extra attention to it?
It's pretty smooth. We're generally on this beer specifically because of the way it was designed to repitch. We're doing a fresh pitch on this beer pretty much every time. So we see a pretty smooth curve. Really, honestly, on these beers, there's a lot of talk around when to dry hop it is, I guess, probably one of the most important things people talk about in the fermenter. Obviously on this one, because we're repitching, we're not actually actively dry hopping it. So we'll dry hop it usually the day after we repitch. But I mean, generally it's just, we don't have to really worry about the temp control because we pitch at 64, set it to 68, let it go up. And then once we repitch, we're ready to go with the dry hop and let it come all the way up, and then she's done.
So you crash it out before you dry hop, obviously, if you're, since this is a yeast generating, brew right here.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, we typically don't need to.
Okay. So you're just pulling yeast off without having to crash. Okay. Yep.
So it's naturally flocking out and then repitch and then dry hop. Yep. So there probably is some biotransformation going on in there with whatever yeast is left in the tank. Compared to the other beers that we've used this yeast with, it's relatively minimal, but it's just like an element.
Sure. And that is, it is something that obviously our friends at Omega have talked about quite a bit, and the content that we've built with them, that, the biotransformation piece isn't a big focus of this, that, those thiol precursors are coming, like you mentioned,
absolutely,
from that mash hopping, even from the, from the malt bill itself, more so than that kind of bio thing. Not in the biotransformation obviously has other benefits potentially in terms of having some other positive flavor impacts, for these things too, but not necessarily on that thiol creation piece. Sure. So what does dry hopping then look like for you? Is there a method to the madness? You just do a single charge, and are there any techniques that you employ to kind of make sure that you're getting a good or pleasant extraction from those hops?
Sure. Well, typically,
and what kind of hops are you using? Just T90 pellets?
We're all typically all T90s. It depends on the beer. On this beer, we're doing 2 charges. We'll do a smaller charge and let it sit for a day, drop out, and then do a larger charge 24, 48 hours later. We like to.
What's the benefit of that?
It's so to me. Again, it's just saturation. So to me, adding all the hops at once, sometimes you don't extract as effectively. So if you do 2 separate charges, I don't know if it's surface area or how exactly this is working. This is a relatively small dry hop, so we'll use this strategy a lot on like larger dry hops, just to kind of let everything infuse once and then fall out and then infuse a second time. We also like to circulate CO2 through the racking arm, just to kind of get everything mixed up and well into suspension before the charge 1 drops out, and then do it again for charge 2.
Sure. And then how long do each of those charges sit in the tank?
24, 48 hours. We've really found that longer exposure times aren't tremendously helpful. So yeah, usually, honestly, the maximum 2 days, I would say, is when we're going to start crashing it after that second charge.
And this is all at 72 when you're dry hopping?
Yeah, we'll go in the upper 60s, and then if it rises with the hop creep or needs to clean any more diacetyl up and keep fermenting and re-ferment, it's allowed to go up to 72, but sometimes it doesn't go that high.
Yeah. How much of an issue is hop creep for you? I mean, I'm in a pale ale. I wouldn't expect it. I mean, it's not like there's a whole ton of fermentables still left as you're doing that kind of thing.
It's not a lot.
Just bigger on some bigger beers.
We've noticed it more in other beers, definitely. On this one, it's relatively minimal, I would say.
Any other kind of approach to finishing the beer after fermentation is over? Is there a way that what do you do from there?
We are extremely careful about transfers. So, very slow, very measured. And honestly, I think a crucial part of our process, at least for packaging beer, is that we have a single head filler, which we bought a system. This is like shortly after the pandemic when we really needed a way to get packaged beer out. American Canning makes this machine that's extremely affordable. It's a single head filler. All of us, myself and Nick and Owen, the other two brewers here, have all worked at larger breweries with massive canning machines and seen a lot of different levels of DO in beers, and this is by far the best we've seen. So
really, what kind of DO are you getting in the package?
We do not have the capability to measure it. We did at the
an anecdotal DO levels.
we all worked at a much larger packaging facility together before and had one of those ridiculous Anton Par machines that does all that stuff. It is completely anecdotal, but I'll tell you, when we package like a double IPA, for example, at 4 months, it's still tasting way better than any other beer I've ever packaged at that, So, and we're used to at old jobs getting sub 50 DOs in the can. So we know it's good. We honestly, we need to make, make a friend who has an Anton Par and actually check them out. But,
or as you package, are there any? And I guess packaging with a one head filler, it's not like this is the focus for the brewery. I mean, it sounds like on premise is probably the primary focus, and the cans. Packaging is really something for a ancillary purchase for people.
Yep, absolutely. We sell almost exclusively on site. It's a brew pub. We were hesitant at first to incorporate canning into our production just because it's a big pain in the ass. Sure. Especially on a small scale. We're running, but we're only running, max 15 cases at a time per batch. So it's really, with a single head filler, we can have one operator who loads, fills, and labels cans and packs off. And, it takes a really short amount of time. And, it's really just...
And then that becomes a to-go 4-pack that somebody who has the beer when they're there at the brew pub can, pick up and take home. And, it's you're raising a ticket price for your consumer, but also providing, an experience for them that lets them keep the thing going.
100%. And we can do offsite events that require cans. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, we all love our beer and we want to take it home in a can. We want to have a cool label on it. We want it to be its own really interesting, beautiful package that lives up to the standard of the liquid inside.
It's got to look good on the gram, man.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't look good on the gram, then did it
then
even
what's
happen?
It all for? Yeah.
Exactly. One other question I had for you: water. We haven't really talked about water, but that's another big piece, especially with hazy pale ale, hazy juicy pale ale like this. What's your approach to water on this beer?
So on this one, we're definitely favoring chloride. We'll typically keep the water fairly soft. So, somewhere around the vicinity of 100 parts per million. But, we're a little over 100 on chloride, a little under 100 on sulfate for a beer like this. I mean, that's typically our approach to something in this realm. We definitely, on other beers, will boost that gypsum up quite a bit. But, I mean, the goal is to have it be soft but still feel the hop presence. So... definitely favoring chloride helps with that. But you still want to have a little bit of that sulfate in there as well.
Sure. As you think about the beer, tasting the beer, what does the definition of that beer become? Because there's the recipe, but do you have an idea and a language for how you describe it and what your goal is for the beer to taste like to an end consumer?
It's a good question. So this is a beer that's kind of taken on a life of its own. So we first brewed it last year, intending it to not necessarily be something that we made forever. And this is back when we were just, filling crowlers. Had a couple different label iterations, and then decided we wanted to keep making it because we all really liked it. Again, for me, like being from the Midwest, pale ale for me has always just been like go-to daily, easy drinking. I've always been a huge hoppy beer fan. But obviously, when you work at a brewery, you don't always want to sit down and have like a 7% IPA. I think that's why a lot of brewers gravitate towards Pilsners and stuff, which obviously we all love those beers as well. But it's just a really nice, well-rounded beer. And what ended up happening is our label artist, Sadie Tinch, developed this really, really cool, beautiful label for it. That really kind of evokes the meaning of the beer in this image, and that's it. Kind of took on a life of its own that way. Where and we're really focused on art here as well. We love our labels, even though we're only selling them in house. We put a lot of time and attention into that because ultimately beer is an art form as well. So we want the whole thing to kind of express that. It's hard to put into words, so that's why it's kind of expressed through art, right?
Sounds good. Well, Greg, I appreciate you talking with you on the podcast. If people want to learn more about Wye Hill, where do they find more about you all?
Sure, you can go to Wyehill, WYEHILL.com. Brand new, beautiful website. We're also on Instagram, Wye Hill Brewing. Or at Wye Hill is our restaurant, our brew pubs page as well. So, yeah, give us a follow.
Cool. Well, congratulations on a gold medal for Luminous Beings, Hazy Juicy Pale Ale, and thanks for talking to me about it on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Man. Cheers.
Up next is light lager, but first, balancing barley and hops is your expertise. Food grade lubricants is theirs. When it comes to what you do, you're the expert. And when it comes to supplying food grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, Clarion Lubricants are the experts. They'll work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your operation. To learn more, visit clarionlubricants.com/foodgrade. Clarion Lubricants, the experts that experts trust. For this segment of the GABF Gold episode, I'm going to Orlando, Florida, with Alex Sarames, head brewer for Deadwords Brewing, who won gold in the light lager category at GABF this year. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Jamie, how you doing? Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Orlando. It's my hometown. In fact, strangely enough, there's a weird story about this. I am recording this remotely from New Jersey right now because that's where I flew to today. But yesterday I was in Orlando at your brewery with David, the founder of Deadwords, hanging out. We just couldn't make the timing work for a podcast episode. I was super impressed. Made sure that we could be able to do this remotely today and make sure we can get this out on the GABF Gold episode. But we here are going to talk about winning gold medal for a light lager. And Alex, you've done it in the weirdest possible way that I could think of, because this is an American light lager beating all the macro guys, beating all the rest of the craft world as well. It's Rahr North Star Pils and Vista hops. You're using Vista hops, a public hop breeding hop that could very well be an IPA hop with soft melony characters and these other types of beautiful elements to it, and you've put it into a light lager. Anyway, it was mind blowing when I heard about this, and I obviously had to keep asking more questions again because this is a very hard category to win for craft brewers fighting against folks that brew light lager en masse. So let's walk through, your recipe design process. As you were thinking about building a light lager for Deadwords, where did you start? Where did you, in that kind of creative process, what was your inspiration and how did you start to develop what the recipe was going to be?
Well, so one of our flagship beers that we have on draft all the time and in can is Placeholder. It's a pre-pro lager. It's all Riverbend malt. I love using craft malt companies. We recently got our craft malt certification, and that is 75-25 two-row and malted corn, and a good amount of crystal. I love crystal. It's crystal from Crosby. That has a good amount of character to it. It's got a decent bite to it. It's got that corny, grainy quality. And it was honestly a little bit too heavy for two friends of one of our owners who are great people who happen to also be investors in Deadwords. And I asked them what they enjoy. And it all went back to various different types of light lagers, domestic lagers. So I set out to make a beer specifically for them. and that's where Bridge was born. And it was just keep it simple. My whole theory on basically everything is to keep it simple. Easy grain bill, easy hop bill, good fermentation, obviously, clean yeast, and that's how Bridge was born.
So let's start then with malt. Rahr North Star Pils. What was the impetus behind that selection?
At the same time, I was also doing a cold IPA, so I was emulating the Wayfinder approach to cold IPA, so continental style malt, corn at the same time. So I really liked that North Star Pils. I liked the light color quality to it.
Sure.
I like that honey aspect that it has as well. My go-to super light malt has always been Wireman Extra Pale Pils. A little bit too meaty for the style that I wanted to go for, though. So that's why I settled on North Star. Obviously from BSG, easy to pick up, relatively inexpensive, but it has great character to it at the same time. There is a little bit of rice syrup solids, but as far as the malt bill goes, it's all Rahr North Star Pils.
What kind of how much rice or rice syrup solids end up in the overall mix, and it obviously makes sense to lighten it up that way.
It's about 12%.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's it's about 81 ish North Star, about 12 rice, and then a bag of Dex just to help it dry out. So about 6% of Dex.
Yeah. Do you mash in any particular way? I mean, I know that they are with North Star. They're definitely trying to catch some of that European Pilsner character. Does it involve any more step mashing or anything more challenging for you?
Nope, just straight 148. Just one single infusion.
Really?
Yeah. We have a great system, PKW. It has a VEC, what they call a various external calandria on the outside. So you can actually take clean wort from the bottom, run it through the VEC, and dump it back in on top, and also heat the mash on at the same time. We screwed around with it a bit in the past, but this one I just wanted to, again, keep it simple. 148 for about 90 minutes just to get a full conversion. I don't have to do any extra processing. That malt itself has great laddering capabilities, so I didn't want to screw any of that up. But yeah, no, just one straight single infusion mash.
What then? Let's talk about hops. Vista hops. Obviously, you're going to use a small amount of hops. This beer isn't about hops, but
very tiny bit. Yeah, I was attracted. Crosby is probably one of my favorite farms. So I usually go to Crosby just to check out flavor profiles and aroma profiles. And what I really liked is that last line in the Crosby description of highly recommended for lagers and light style beers, because it completely goes against everything from like the Vista site, essentially, where it's all focused on heavy IPAs, double dry hop, hazy stuff. And I was like, you know what? This is already a fun little experiment in itself in producing something for friends of the pub. So let me try out something new. And it landed on Vista. I really like the description, the melony characteristics, the stone fruit characteristics. Granted, I'm using it in a very light amount, but you still get a little bit in the back end. The malt really definitely shines through, though. You get that honey character that is actually advertised in its description, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that it almost gave it that hop character actually almost added that little bit of corn sweetness that you might expect just from having corn in that kind of beer, but it actually came just in really small trace suggestive amounts at most, just from the hops itself. And I thought that was a clever kind of way to construct a beer like that.
It was that little bit of white peach that I noticed that gave like that nice summer sweetness.
Yeah. So how do you use Vista hops through the process?
It's just 2 shots. So it's actually a long boil. It's a 120-minute boil. Just rip off any type of DMS I possibly can pick up. Give myself a little bit of extra time just in the brew house. But it's a shot at 90 and a shot at 5. So it's on a total of 9 IBU, 4 and 5. I like the high alpha acid. I didn't want to do any type of double up on hop. I didn't want to throw like Centennial or Bravo in or Warrior for any of that clean bitterness. I just wanted the same thing throughout. Again, it always goes back to simple. We're a relatively new brewery. Have to keep it simple. Can't spend a lot. That was another part of the process in creating this beer. what's something that we can make that's cheap, that's going to be quality, that's going to follow the Deadwords vibe, and that people are going to dig. And it was Bridge.
It's a simple but very easily drinkable beer that also, it's enjoyable by, not having to stand out, but just very small, clever hints in there that make it more fun to drink than maybe some of your macro beers. Well, let's talk about fermentation then. What does fermentation look like, on that cold side? Now, obviously, there's no dry hopping in this beer.
No.
It's not a hop. It's not about the hops, but fermentation. What kind of lager yeast do you use for this?
So it's BSI Andix actually. So super clean lager. Probably one of the cleanest, easiest working lagers that I've ever messed with. Love Imperial, had L17 in-house for the longest time, but I picked up Andix off a recommendation from a friend here actually in Orlando, and it is fantastic. I use it for everything in-house. Knock out at about 50, pitch a 1.5 basically. So we do an entire brink for a 15, 17 barrel batch. 50, let it bring up to 52 for that lag time. Run at 52 for about 4 days until about 4 Plato. Ramp it up to 58. Just let it free rise. Give it a de-rest. Let it finish down to about a 1.5, and then spun it.
It seems so simple. What do you think?
It's in the day and age where everybody is trying to throw everything into beers, the kitchen sink included, I'm kind of going the opposite direction. My history comes from Oregon. I was paired up with a lot of the old guys in Bend, and it was always simplicity, and it always kind of works in the end, in my personal opinion.
Sure. What is it about that Andix yeast, versus like a 3470, that you enjoy more about it?
I was actually talking to BSI last week, just asking questions between Andix and L17, because placeholder, like I said, house pre-pro lager used L17, but I switched over to Andix. It's much more malt forward, malt focused. Doesn't bring out the hop like Augustiner would. It's just super ridiculously clean. And for someone that loves malt, loves light beers, my go-to will always be, and has always been, Rainier. I have a buddy that ships it to me from Oregon every couple of weeks. But yeah, I just wanted clean, super clean profile.
Sure. And of course that's not going to produce the kind of sulfur that other lagers might be known for either. You're trying to keep it very, very clean and very, very easy and accessible.
I wanted the malt and the simplicity of the beer to shine, nothing else.
Yeah. So then let's talk about what you think it is that rose to the point of it being considered, the best light lager in the Great American Beer Festival. Best American style light lager in the American Beer Festival. What do you if you're looking at your process, you're looking at the creative process through the technical process. What do you think some of those key steps were along the way that may have set it apart?
I think water was probably a big one. We have RO. I strip everything down to nothing, and then we'll build it back up depending on what I'm making. I love water science.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that's exactly what, if we look at the last winner of that category, Seismic out in California, who we also have a whole nother podcast with about their gold winning light lager. Water, I think, was an equal focus for them. For them, they built an entire reclamation program to have highly limited overall water use, because they're reusing all their water, but it's highly treated, stripped down, built back up, just like you're talking about. What does building water up then look like for you? And you're right, because Orlando water, really, honestly, it's terrible. It's all coming out of limestone aquifers. It's not very far below the ground.
And then there's so much construction in the area that they're dosing it with chlorine so heavy, so often that no matter, you'll be ripping through filters left and right. The RO, we have a U.S. Water Systems 4,000 GPM RO. It's great. We use it for honestly everything, processed water, CIP water, absolutely everything, just because Orlando water is so bad. But yeah, strips it down to basically zero. This is really it's heavy sulfate. It's 200 ppm, and then nothing else. I wanted, I just wanted focus on crisp. I wanted crispy boy. That was the big one. I mean, in a day and age of double, triple, quadruple dry hopped IPAs with lactose and pineapple, I wanted something that you could take a case of eventually, throw it on the boat, and go out and fish all day.
Sure. So you have 2 brewing assistants, I think, or 2 other brewers at the brewery, or I mean, at least one that I met yesterday. Sobo.
So we got, Sobo. Yep, he was here. Oh, was he here yesterday? Oh, he was watching the game. Yeah. Chris Sobo. Saborowicz is his last name. Lovingly referred to as Sobo. I have a lot of people in the front of the house that also volunteer. It's just one gigantic, massive team. Like I said, we're new. We're just about 10 months. Our GM, Stephanie's fantastic. She has an anthropology degree, so she really plays a critical role in coming up with names and ideas. She is actually bringing in an author, John Arthur, on Thursday, who's a beer historian, beer archaeologist, essentially, is going to come in and hang out. But yes, Soa's in the back with me. He's been here for about 4 months. Great guy. Came from Brewing here in town. Avid homebrewer, still homebrews. I remember the day that I walked into my garage when I was professionally homebrewing and said to myself, what am I doing? And he still does it every weekend, crank something out. So he does a little bit of R&D for us. So he's great. Yeah.
How do you build a, from the ground up SOPs and a kind of process, through the brew house, working with another brewer, to maintain that kind of quality? And I should also, paint the picture for folks. Walking into the brew house yesterday, it is pristine. It is incredibly clean, insanely clean. Everything is in the right place, and there is no mess anywhere. You all have a very finely pointed approach to maintaining the brew house and the cellar. And I think that it's interesting to think that precision may be coming through, in all of the processes around brewing too.
Prior to me being in the brewing industry, I was in the chemical industry. So that is where I would say that most likely that real focus on keeping the facility absolutely pristine comes from, because we were required to. I brewed synthetic insect pheromones for mating disruptants in Oregon. That is what I did before I brewed beer.
That sounds very, very sexy.
It was very, very, very cool. It was a very interesting position. Learning organic chemistry from the ground up over the course of a couple months to make pheromones was amazing. And I took that and I applied it to beer as best as I could. And I still do. There's still a lot to learn. You learn something new every day. But as far as SOPs and processes and all that, it has to be precise and it has to be perfect, because where I came from, it was people's lives could be on the line at the same time, working with various solvents all the time, doing various acid reactions, distillations, producing hydrogen. Everything has to be meticulous, so to say. With Sobo, though, he is fantastic. He's harder on himself than we are. He's a perfectionist, just like myself. So it was a great fit when he came on board. He will pick up things that I will miss because I have so many things on my plate. So he cleans up after me, and it's fantastic. He's worth his weight in gold, basically. If I didn't know his history, I would say he had a similar history to mine. He's culinary, though. So he went to culinary school. He's been in fast-paced kitchens. He's had to go through the whole gauntlet of SOPs for cooking. He takes that education and also brings it to the brewery at the same time. So we have the Abomination series that he focuses on, which is great.
Sure. So beyond water, are there any other fine points to some of your process technique or materials handling, that you think, may feed into this key of success?
Fermentation, always proper fermentation. Don't rush the beer. I know it probably
when you say proper, what does proper mean? Which are you pushing pitch rates or
do cell counts? Do proper pitch rates? Exactly. Yeah. Focus on the progress of fermentation. Don't let it run down too low without ramping it up at the very end to get that de-rest, to get a little bit of that exothermic reaction that's left in fermentation.
What does your checking process look like on that?
Obviously gravity's daily, pH daily, twice a day if need be. For that particular beer, it's, obviously if we have to come in on a Saturday or Sunday, it's just the two of us. We both live about a half hour away, but we'll do it. It really is all about the beer. And those were words that were spoken to me by my mentor, Larry Sador, 10 years ago. It's all about the beer. Far too often people get wrapped up in the business of beer and they don't produce the beer that they want to produce, that they're capable of producing. And as long as you focus on that, you will.
Larry, so that was Crux. You worked up at Crux in Bend?
Yep.
Where'd the career take you after that?
So I went to
was that your first professional brewing gig?
That was my first brewery. Yeah. I started from the ground up. I started behind the bar and then eventually moved into the cellar. Went to Silver Moon Brewing afterwards. It had been recently purchased by two great guys from the Bay Area, Matt Barrett and James Watts, and they have since expanded it to, I think, 6 or 7 state distribution. We built a 30-barrel Prospero production facility about 25 miles north in Redmond. Great guys. They've built the brand up. I want to say, saved somewhat of a dying pub. There's a full stage outside now. There's food trucks. They just really did it. After that, I went down to the Caribbean. I wasn't, say, tired of the high desert, but I wanted water. Growing up in New Jersey and being a beach kid, I wanted to get back to the water. So I looked up and down the East Coast, West Coast, Hawaii, and the Caribbean, and I found one at the farthest place I possibly could find one. This is in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I was there for a little bit, but I got hit by Irma and Maria, and I lost everything. Oh. So there was also really no point in staying because there was a tiny little pub that was rebuilt. It was an old chop house and brewery owned by Frank Day. There was a new brewery on island that opened up called Leatherback, and they control the VI now as far as craft beer, Puerto Rico and Southern Florida. So I came back over the mainland, and I was in Southwest Florida for a little bit at Big Blue Brewing in Cape Coral. Family also owns a rum distillery at the same time. They decided to focus on that rum distillery, sell the brewery to another large brewery here in Florida called Big Storm, and then I went back to Oregon, and I was at Cascade Lakes Brewing for a few years. 30 years after I started, it was bought by a Bend family, the Ryan family, Andy and Bruce, father and son, and they have since taken it and fixed the name, fixed the brand, and it is now Central Oregon's only non-for-profit brewery. So yeah, my journey is quite large. It's
crisscrossing the country, crossing small seas, and
exactly. Yeah. Hey, if you're gonna do it big, right? But no, I landed here for family reasons, and I'm sticking around for a while. It's a great opportunity. It's a great brewery. David's a great guy. Like he said, he's the visionary. He's the one who came up with it all. He's the one who came up with the breakdown for the menu, and he gives me complete freedom. And I think that is something that a lot of brewers are jealous of.
It's an ambitious brewing project for Orlando.
It really is, especially with the Amphora, yeah.
I was born and raised in Orlando, and my formative beer years all happened in Orlando, back when it was Microbrew Mondays with Dollar Sierra Nevadas at the Go Lounge, which hasn't existed since the mid to late 90s. I would drink beer at the Mill back in the early 90s. It has never been launching something that big with that kind of ambition and that kind of quality is certainly something that the city has never seen before. But on the same token, it has now paid off with the first GABF gold medal that the city of Orlando has seen since 1993. So 19 years, it's been 19 years since any brewery in the city of Orlando has won a gold medal.
Bringing it back, man.
And, so I think it says something that you're doing something with, in a style as competitive as light lager, something that some, major breweries focus pretty heavily on, more so than that. Any advice for smaller craft brewers, that are brewing their own light lagers. It sounds like, one nice piece of advice would be to think outside some of the typical hop box. That there are ways to skin a cat, more than one way to do that. And that, you found some really interesting ways to create some of the character that people want in an unorthodox, approach to that. But any other thoughts for folks that are out there thinking about their own?
Oh man, don't be afraid to screw around. Even if you dump it, you brewed it. That was something that Larry actually said to me a long time ago. I don't know, man. It's one of those deals where don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to jump out of the box, like you said. Vista was something that I was looking at going, nah, let me just go back to Crystal. Crystal's like my absolute favorite. Or Nugget, or entertain something that would be like, oftentimes, because we have, like, say, the Resurrection series, a big part of when I brew true to specific styles, I try to put myself in the shoes of the brewer at the time and try to use maybe what was available also at the time. And this one was completely different. I just broke all my own rules, really. And I dug the description. I grabbed a little sample. I did a little bit of a rub, and I said, why not? It just had that nice, light, fruity character to it that I knew that wasn't going to come out majorly, but I also said to myself, well, what if I take a portion of it and dry hop it? So it was one of those things where I had multiple ideas in my head, maybe at the same time, looking at that one particular hop.
So this wasn't a calculated brew for the competition kind of thing. This,
this was brewed for friends and family. Yeah, two specific people that played an intricate role in getting Deadwords off the ground. It was for them. So, also, word of advice, might sound cheesy, but do it for love. Do it for why you do it. Don't do it for just to win, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, it makes sense. Thanks for joining me on this episode, this little mini episode of our GABF Gold podcast. Alex, if people want to learn more about Deadwords, where do they find out more about Deadwords?
Deadwordsbeer.com, I believe it is. We got a Facebook, we got an Instagram, great social media coordinator. Just hop on, I would say, Facebook or Instagram. You'll get all the updates. We are connected to Untapped as well. So hop on Untapped. You can see the entire draft menu that we have.
If you're in Orlando visiting theme parks, get out of the theme parks. Get closer to downtown. Get into the real Orlando and check out some of the great beer that's popping up all around now in the city. And Deadwords is clearly at the helm of that movement. Thanks for joining me on this segment, Alex. Cheers.
Thanks, Jimmy. Cheers.
Before we wrap this up, AccuBrew is an analytical tool designed to collect and compare the information brewers need to produce consistent results. CanCraft's design and aluminum specialists are here to support your business every step of the way. And when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, Clarion Lubricants are the experts. As always, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. Let us know that this content matters to you. And a big thanks to my very old friend Tom Mayer for loaning me their shed/ancillary workspace to record that segment with Alex. Tom's a senior editor for the Marshall Project, doing important reporting on prisons in America. But I've actually known Tom since he was in journalism school at Mizzou, because he wrote for my mid-90s ska zine, Scatastrophe. And in fact, it was Tom who first introduced me to his college buddy, Joe Stang, back in 2003, when the three of us collaborated on a short-lived soccer blog. Anyway, it's a small world. Well, I mean, we keep making it smaller and smaller. Thanks for the temporary studio space, Tom. It was great seeing you today. We're only a couple weeks away from our Best in Beer episodes. Those big ones, they are some of the biggest of the year in terms of the number of people that tune in and listen to them. It's always a big deal. Super fun for us to do. The issue is the printer right now. We're reading the trophies. Stay tuned for that one. Of course, we'll be back this Friday with our usual long-form interview format. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.